Yellow cake with chocolate icing. Let me show you how I made it. I'm making this yellow cake using the recipe out of this classic cookbook. Baby, my mama made so many amazing recipes out of this cookbook. If you grew up in the early 80s, your mother or grandmother probably had this cookbook as well. Baby, it had all the information, the oven chart, what broiling is, how to use a thermometer, and the pictures. Baby, the pictures in this cookbook were everything. I am making an old school fashioned southern yellow cake with chocolate icing. So I thought it was only fitting to use this cookbook and the recipe out of the cake section for a yellow cake with chocolate frosting. Look at all the different frosting recipes in this cookbook. Here's the yellow cake recipe, very simple, and this is what I'm following. Now, baby, my mama only used this type of cake flour. This was her favorite brand, so I'm gonna stick beside it. Baby, you're gonna need a sifter for this. You're gonna need 3 cups of cake flour and then 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder. Baby, make sure it's baking powder, not baking soda. Baby, if you use baking soda, you're gonna have a nasty cake, so make sure you're using baking powder. Make sure you're using the accurate amount. You only need 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder. This recipe honestly is really simple. After you measure out your baking powder, you want to measure out 1 teaspoon of salt. Baby, I'm not putting no Himalayan salt in my damn cake. My mama used Morton salt and I'm going to use Morton salt. I'm going to stick beside it. All right, now you got your salt in. Now you want to sift your mixture. Now, anytime I'm wearing this caftan, I'm getting ready to do some serious cooking. This is one I just got off the TikTok shop. I absolutely love it, but I don't know why I thought it was a good idea for me to sift flour wearing this black caftan. Yeah, that didn't make no damn sense. Now, all you want to do is just sift all of your dry ingredients together just like this. Once you have your ingredients sifted, you want to get out your mixer. The recipe calls for 2/3 cups of butter or margarine. Baby, I'm using butter and I'm using salted butter. You can use unsalted butter if you want. I just had salted butter and to me, I can't really taste the difference. The cake still tastes amazing. And I'm having to use these half sticks. My husband didn't get whole sticks of butter. He got half sticks. So that's why it looks like I'm adding so much butter, but I used about 10 tablespoons or so of butter. Baby, I had to ask Siri, how many tablespoons is 2/3 cups? I mean, they could have just put in 11 tablespoons or almost 11 tablespoons of butter, but I did the math. Now, this recipe calls for you to cream the butter first. So I'm going to put on my paddle attachment to my KitchenAid mixer, and I'm going to cream my butter. And baby, make sure your butter is softened. It's not going to come out right if you don't use softened butter. After creaming my butter for about 2 to 3 minutes, I'm going to gradually add in some sugar. You need 1 3/4 cup of sugar. Do not add it in all at once. You want to gradually add it in, okay? So add a little bit, mix, scrape down the sides, and repeat. One thing about baking, you have to have a lot of patience. I normally do not do a lot of baking because my patience level ain't there. But I really wanted to make this yellow cake with chocolate frosting for my birthday series. You want to cream your butter and sugar together until light. Now you want to crack 2 eggs. I always make sure to get that egg snot out. That's something my mama always did, so that's something I always do. After you add in your 2 eggs, you want to add in 1 1/2 teaspoons of vanilla. And then beat until fluffy. While that's getting nice and fluffy, you want to measure out 1 1/4 cup of milk. Now add a little bit of your dry ingredients and your milk. You want to add in a little bit at a time, scraping the sides as you go. I did this about 4 times, so I just added a little bit of milk, a little bit of flour, a little bit of milk, a little bit of flour. I made sure to mix it about 1 minute between each round. Baby, this is where the patience comes in. If you're here from the video where I talked about how this cake represented such a big part of my childhood, let me know in the comments what was the repast cake for you. I honestly called my cousin just to make sure this is the most popular repast cake. Typically, when you go to a repast, especially in the South, this cake is definitely on the dessert table. And they're going to make sure to give you a nice thin slice because everybody got to get a piece. The other traditional repast cake is a pound cake. In Eastern North Carolina, you'll also find a pineapple cake and a coconut cake. Baby, normally that pineapple cake or that coconut cake is just for the family, okay? Somebody, grandmama or auntie bought it to the repast and you're supposed to put that to the side for the family. Now, for somebody who don't really bake too much, this cake came out good. Well, at least the batter did. This was the best part of watching my mama bake a cake is tasting the batter at the end. Look how silky and smooth it is. I don't know about you, but my mama would grease her cake pans with Crisco. I know they have that spray with the flour in it for cakes, but baby, I'm going to stick beside this method every single time. This is an old school Southern yellow cake with chocolate frosting, so I'm going to make it the old school Southern way. I adding Crisco to my cake pans and then adding my flour to get my cake pans nicely coated. This batter was enough for a 2-layer cake. If you have 8-inch cake pans, you could probably get away with 3 layers. I only have 9-inch pans, so I just decided to do 2 layers. If you saw my other video, I talked about how I grew up in a funeral home. I went to funerals and repasts all the time. There was a time that my mother hired this older lady named Miss Bessie to make cakes for the families. The family could choose what flavor cake they wanted, and Miss Bessie would bake them and bring them to the funeral home. And we would deliver the cakes to the family when we did the house setup. Look how pretty these cakes turned out. I baked them on 350 degrees for about 30 minutes. Next time, I'm gonna set my timer for 27 minutes because they got a little too brown. Now for the frosting, you'll need 1/3 cup of softened butter and 1/3 cup of milk. And then add in 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Give that a good mix until it's well incorporated. You want to let this go for a little bit. Baby, I had to trust the process on this one because I ran out of patience. For whatever reason, my butter and my milk were not coming together. But once I threw in my powdered sugar, baby, it worked out just fine. You're going to need 2 3/4 cups of powdered sugar. After you add in your powdered sugar, you want to make sure you scrape down the sides. I definitely added my powdered sugar in batches, just because if you add it all at one time, you'll have powdered sugar every damn where. Also add in a pinch of salt and 1/3 cup of cocoa powder. Now let that mix until the cocoa powder is well incorporated with the rest of the ingredients. I thought this frosting came out so good. I actually made 2 batches of it because I was like, is this going to be enough frosting to cover my cakes? So I made a second batch of it. I don't show it in this video, but I wanted to have enough icing. I did not want my icing to be skimpy, okay? But that's totally up to you. I had a lot of icing left over, so I probably didn't need to do that. Once again, I am not a big baker, so I just covered my bases, okay? So this is me scraping down the sides. Once again, I'm going to give it another good mix, and I have made the perfect chocolate frosting. I call myself being a professional. Top of my cake was a little high, so I just cut off a little bit of it so the cake is nice and level. I then added a lot of frosting. I wanted a nice thick layer of frosting in between my layers. Baby, when I tell you this frosting was so good, I found this recipe online. I did not use a recipe out of the Better Homes and Gardens cookbook. I tried a recipe for frosting out of that cookbook and I didn't like how it turned out. So I tried another recipe and I like this recipe much better. I like using cocoa powder instead of using baking chocolate. It's just my preference. So baby, I got 1 layer frosting. I'm just going to add this second layer on top. I felt like all the mothers at the church who would bring a cake to the repast or to the church service were smiling on me as I made this cake. Look at the sun shining through my kitchen window. Baby, the ancestors was with me when I was making this cake because it turned out really well. I will write out the exact measurements in the description of this YouTube video. But I definitely love how this frosting came out. I was so proud of myself. Look at me, I'm just cheesing. I was trying to make little waves in the icing and everything. Growing up in the South like I did, we always had desserts at every function. Whether it was quarterly meeting between 2 church services, whether it was pastor's anniversary, family reunion, a repast, revival, you name it, there was going to be a cake there. Baby, people didn't care nothing about no nut allergy back then. Okay, they would slap some pecans on top of a cake. Like 1, 2, 3. You saw them nuts on top of there. If you had a nut allergy, you just took them off or you just didn't eat it. I honestly didn't even know anybody who had a nut allergy until I got older. My daughter has a nut allergy and cannot have nuts. So baby, growing up, I didn't know too many people that had a nut allergy. I knew people that didn't like nuts, but I do. And I wanted to make sure I put my pecans on top of my cake, just like the old church mothers used to do. Then says Southern like yellow cake with chocolate frosting with them pecans on top. Look at me, I'm right proud. There are just certain dishes that remind you of your childhood, and when it comes to desserts, this one is big for me. Baby, Southern people fellowship over food, okay? This is how my yellow cake with chocolate frosting turned out. Like I said, I put those pecans on top to give it that Southern feel. I was so proud of how this cake turned out, and I made it from scratch, okay? If you want more Southern cake recipes or more Southern desserts, you can find them in my cookbook, Memories on a Plate, Southern Recipes I Learned from My Mama. There's a strawberry cake recipe, a pig picking cake recipe, my mom's chocolate supreme recipe, apple walnut cake, my red velvet trifle, and so many more Southern recipes. I will add the link to purchase my cookbook in the description. You can purchase the cookbook from Amazon, and you can also purchase it directly from my publisher. The cookbook does not just have Southern desserts, it also has Southern starters and appetizers, Southern sides, my favorite entrees, as well as breads. I'm talking hush puppies, biscuits, donuts, the works. I was so happy at how this cake turned out. It tasted just like it did growing up. Next time I make this cake, I will bake it for a little less time. It could have been that my oven was a tad too hot. I had it at 350 degrees. Next time I'll bake it at 340 degrees and see if it turns out a little bit lighter. But all in all, baby, I was happy with it. The flavor was there. The chocolate icing was absolutely delicious. So smooth and so chocolatey, a 10 out of 10. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Make sure to subscribe and turn your notification bell on so you don't miss the next video from me spilling the sweet tea.